All right, so Friday, Gina writes, "Hi everyone. We wanted to take a minute to give you some insight into some additional changes coming to the PTS affecting combat and balance. As we've continued reading through your feedback from testing these changes, we determined that some of our goals were actively competing against each other or with each other and not reaching the target audiences in ways we intended," which was what we said as soon as the original notes came out, right? This is not going to raise the floor. It's only going to reduce the ceiling and probably also reduce the floor, which does not change the difference between top and bottom. The original goal, as I understood it, was to change the difference in DPS from the very lowest to the very top to make it easier to create content that can be played by both. Yes, the bottom is still going to stay with normal, the top is still going to stay with vet, but if you close that gap a little bit, it's easier to create content in that normal to vet range. We ultimately want to help raise the floor and reduce the ceiling in regard to DPS output, while simultaneously improving class balance in some problematic areas. So far, this has led to competing changes that have hurt some groups of players, despite us stating we didn't want to actively harm playstyles with any particular change. We are committed to following through with additional ways to mitigate these issues while still meeting our intended goals. So I think this is referring to heavy attack builds. Am I wrong? Vishy, thank you so much for gifting 5 subs. 1 to Lost Deception, 1 to Fatbox, 1 to Sounds Not Straight, 1 to Gatorbite, 1 to Fire Dragon. Thank you, thank you. With all that said, in next week's PTS patch, you'll find that we will be re-evaluating some of the adjustments to light and heavy attacks, so they are a bit less drastic. Light and heavy attacks will once again scale with your stats, just to a lesser extent than before. Overall, there will still be a nerf on light attack damage, but this will allow us to give a lot more love to heavy attacks and will be less stark of a difference. So instead of having flat damage for light and heavy attacks, they will still scale off of your heavy or your highest stat, but it's still a nerf. Fine. I am absolutely fine with that change. There will also be a handful of tweaks to some class abilities in next week's PTS patch based on the feedback we've received, but the majority of these will come in the final PTS patch, and that always kind of worries me a little bit. Note that the focus of these adjustments will be on Magicka-based Nightblades, Wardens, and Sorcerers. Additionally, for Dungeons and Trials, we will be reducing the health of all bosses on Veteran difficulty and above in the final PTS patch to account for the overall DPS loss. For Trials specifically, we'll be reducing the health of all champions and bannermen on Veteran difficulty and above. The reduction in health for each boss will vary from encounter to encounter, but the result should be that each dungeon and trial boss fight will provide a similar challenge to what is on live currently. The trial bannermen and champions provide a challenge in their own right, so we felt additional adjustments were warranted. We recognize that there's been a lot of concern surrounding the combat changes currently on the PTS, and we truly believe with some continued adjustments and iterations, this is the best course of action for the long-term health of the game. We're also working on a brief Q&A that should help address some of the more general questions surrounding these changes. Thanks for reading, and of course, take the time to provide some much in-depth and valuable feedback. Prepares for Magflower with Resto and Pale Order. Okay, so reading this, I'm relatively happy. I don't like that we have so many changes coming in the final iterations of PTS, but I'm glad that they're listening. I did not think we would see a change to light and heavy attacks, if I'm being honest. Of course, this doesn't address some of the things we see in the patch notes, but so now we have patch notes. Okay. Let's see. We have some Witches Festival event stuff. While that's interesting, that's not what we're talking about now. So we're going to just a couple little tweaks there. Little tweak. Oh, I did have a question. So if are they changing all the bosses? She said all of the bosses. Fungal Grotto 1, even on Vet, probably doesn't need to be tweaked even if DPS goes down. we've been doing Fungal Grotto 1 for 8 years now, with DPS that we used to be able to do. I think the main concern was more recent content that was created with the power creep in mind. I don't know that we need to change all bosses. Don't tell them what they're doing. I want to solo all vet dungeons before they fix it. Okay. So these are Tales of Tribute, Exploration, Dungeon and Group Content, Combat, and Abilities. Spindle Clutch still the hardest endgame boss? I don't know about that. Oh, I should try Vatishran again with Oakensoul. I don't really want to, but I should. We have 3 weeks before live. So live comes out August 22nd. So we have 3 weeks to figure this stuff out. Okay. Light and heavy attacks once again scale with the highest of your offensive stats rather than dealing a flat amount of damage. Do it for the content? I don't think I want to do that with witnesses. It's going to be a sloppy, sloppy run. I do not like Vatishran. Neo Geo Deluxe, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Okay. Reduced the damage that light attacks do by approximately 26% compared to what's currently on the live servers to ease back on their overall impact while retaining their importance in a rotation. I'm okay with that. They have discreetly introduced a new class, the Healer DPS class. I'd love to see new classes, but not, yeah. Updated the damage scaling coefficients from fully charged heavy attacks to follow a streamlined model that looks at their total cast time, cooldown, and damage when paired with a spammable attack such as Lava Whip to help reduce the DPS loss seen when you utilize heavy attack instead of light attacks. Their coefficient will now be a total of 1 per second rather than varying between 0.97 and 1.12. This will result in the following adjustments. One-hand and shield heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 1%. Two-handed heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 1%. Dual-wield heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 28%. Wow. Inferno and Ice Staff heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 26%. Total cast time reduced to 1.8 seconds, identical to the total cast of two-handed weapons, down from 2.1. Resources have been reduced to retain the same restore per second. Restoration Staff heavy attack, damage increased by approximately 6%. Lightning Staff heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 2%. Bow heavy attacks, damage increased by approximately 1%. Werewolf heavy attacks, damage reduced by approximately 14%. Volendrung heavy attacks, damage reduced to 7,500, down from 7,560. Okay, developer comment. Our original intent with the flat value rather than scaling was to target players who were boosting their stats beyond a set value, but ultimately it ended up dealing far more damage to mid-tier players than we anticipated. We have decided to go back to scaling modifiers and instead focus on reducing their ability to scale upwards. The new value is based off a melee spammable, where light attacks now deal 1/3 of that damage rather than 45% of it. This will still result in a reduction across the board, but by bringing these attacks down, we have also been able to spend more time shortening the gap between them and heavy attacks. Interesting. Okay. Buffs and debuffs. Empower. This buff now increases your damage against monsters with heavy attacks by 80%, rather than your damage done with light and heavy attacks by 1,800 from PTS, or 40% from the live servers. So will Empower do anything to light attacks, or just heavy attacks now? 80% is crazy. We have turned this buff type into a more niche playstyle focus buff that is meant to help empower more accessibility-driven builds, as heavy attacks requiring less precision, activation, and frequency of inputs compared to their light attack counterparts. In addition to this, we have decided to remove the impact it can have in PvP environments to avoid re-enabling one-shot builds. How does this remove the impact it can have in PvP environments, or am I missing something? Yeah, it seemed like medium attack was working too. Just by the wording, it seemed like medium attacks would also be affected. And power only works on monsters. What about humans in PvE? I say final boss of Banished Cells 1. Will that no longer help? Is your damage going to be way lower on those bosses? Or are we just talking PvE versus PvP? I question the monsters wording. I'm guessing all PvE enemies are considered monsters and all players aren't. Are humans not the actual monsters anyways? Yeah, I'm hoping they just mean mobs versus players. NPC bad guys versus player bad guys. Yeah, Sauce is not known for their clear wording. I really wish that we had some precision in our wording. I would assume that monsters and bosses in Imperial City would also be affected. We could maybe do some playing around. We'll see. Okay. I also think, speaking of precision and language, they keep using the word accessibility in two different ways, and I'm kind of struggling with that. So in the initial explanation of the changes, it kept talking about accessibility to all players, and I don't believe they meant, and they stated in a stream later, that they did not mean by that accessibility to those with physical or mental reasons that they could not keep up with the top 1%. You know, somebody with arthritis or whatever who has trouble bar swapping and keeping up with all of their skills and utilizes a heavy attack build, they were not thinking about those players initially. But now we're using the word accessible again to mean exactly that. And I wish they would use two different words. Just remember the real monsters were the friends we made along the way, or something. Right. You'd assume monsters be any NPC. I'm hoping. But, you know, anybody who's done endeavors knows that sometimes monsters actually means, like, only mammals. Who knows, right? Okay. And then the tooltip says monsters again without any explanation. And you just kind of have to experiment to figure it out. Precision is not their strong point. I believe talking about accessibility was just an attempt to use a free word. I can't speak to intent, but it was definitely confusing the forums as people asking how these changes would help people who could not physically keep up with full rotations, when I believe they meant accessibility in that newer players or mid-grade players keeping up with the content. It specifically only works on Welwas and Craglorn. Exactly my point. Sometimes you just don't freaking know. All right. Should we read all the changes here? Let's see. Warden Dive. Cutting Dive Morph now applies a bleed on targets for 10 seconds if they are not off balance, rather than refunding its cost if striking an off balance target. This bleed does not stack like its original form. And I don't play Warden enough to know how big these changes are. Scorch, this ability, and the Deep Fissure Morph now deal their damage after 3 and 9 seconds rather than 4 and 10. These abilities now hit with 2 unique damage sources. The first hit deals approximately 14% less damage, while the second hit does 20% more damage. Reduce the cost of these abilities down to 2,700, down from 3,240, to help improve their ability to be recast early for more DPS or faking your opponent out. Subterranean Assault Morph. This morph continues to reduce the time it takes for the second hit to go off, but this second hit does not gain the extra damage. Please note this ability is currently not working as intended, and its timing is still at 3 and 8 seconds rather than the intended 3 and 6. Okay, I'm confused. We have 3 and 9, 4 and 10, 3 and 8, and 3 and 6. Do they mean 3 and 9, not 3 and 6? I'm very confused. The message evolved into the worst drama between vets who saw the flaws in the plan and the people who got angry how one could speak up against change that is pro-disabled players. It was a prime disaster that could have split the community beyond repair. And honestly, I think it did in some ways. Because there are still people crying that the toxic endgamers are ableist. And that wasn't even really part of the conversation. But because they used the word accessible, it became part of the conversation erroneously. Also, if they keep damage stupid high like it is now, the game remains accessible. You can do practically any content in the game you want while barely doing anything, just not on veteran, which in my opinion is fine. Yeah. I mean, there's a point where a casual player who plays a couple hours a week, I don't feel they should expect to be able to do Dreadsail Reef trifecta, you know, like on first try. I understand the frustration when you don't have a lot of time to play and you feel like some things are out of your reach. Do you know, though, what I think makes it more out of their reach than anything else? Major sweeping combat changes every 3 months. You know what I mean? What makes things inaccessible to casual players is the fact that they have to redo their build, every build, if they have more than one character, it's more than one. They have to relearn how things work together. They have to relearn what all the changed sets do. They have to re-farm gear, and by the time they're 1 or 2 hours a week, plus they want to do their crafting writs, right? By the time their 1 or 2 hours a week shows up, or once they've farmed that 1 or 2 hours a week, it's changed again. My metas are like 3 updates old because I have to... Yeah, I haven't been running endgame content recently, so my builds are also about 3 updates old. About a year old. You are welcome to use whatever language you like. I just may not read it. I appreciate the passion, though. I appreciate the passion, Bananas. But yeah, and not everybody can do a normal trial with 4 people, right? But if you have a trial group with 3 or 4 players that maybe have more time and energy to invest in the game, the other people kind of get a free ride. So if you go into a pug group, you can probably clear, right? Yeah, I'm still running Mother Sorrow Medusa too. It works. It works just fine. Tazin, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. I'm still doing endgame content, but I just don't care anymore about that last 5% or whatever. You know, I miss about 30% of my light attacks because I haven't practiced parsing in over a year, really. I'm still running Mother Sorrow Medusa, but I can still hold my own in most content, including Vet. So, but I also put more time into this game than the casual player can. So I'm okay with some changes. I am absolutely fine with some changes. I just don't want to see giant changes every 3 months. And unfortunately, my fear is that these changes are not right. And we're going to continue to see changes over the next year as they continually try to fix it. That's my fear if these changes get pushed out. And that has been one of my fears. That is 100% a homebrew problem. ZeniMax believes a forced meta shift is necessary to keep the game healthy. At the same time, they cry that the top 0.2% evolve into DPS monsters every time, while in fact players hate the meta shift but appreciate the power creep as long as they are not in the top 0.2%. I don't mind changes every 6 months to a year if they are minor. Okay, so let's say Mother Sorrow Medusa is the best thing out there. It's not, but let's say it is. But in 6 months, this new set comes out that does 2% more damage. So meta's going to change, right? Because those people are going to chase that 2%. But as a casual player, I can keep my Mother Sorrow Medusa and do 2% less and still clear. I'm fine with that. And if you want to be sweaty, go out and get that extra 2%. More power to you. But that's not what we're talking about. Completely overhauling your characters every single time. Until you just get change fatigue and you quit. And you're running gear that's 4 patches old and does 30% less damage than anything else. They want to fix the skill gap, give us some sort of mentor system like Final Fantasy with feedback options to keep it clean, and give us better tutorials. My thought, and we talked about this last time we read over notes, give us a training arena, a single person arena like Maelstrom, that you go to at certain points in your gameplay, either voluntarily or as part of a quest chain, say for like Undaunted. So in the initial tutorial, you learn light attack, heavy attack, block, break free, great. And any more than that is going to be too much. But maybe at level like 50, or maybe even earlier, level 20, level 30, you have the option to go into this arena, advertise it as improving your DPS, and you teach light attack weaving. And then you hit level 50 or even CP 160, and now maybe you learn bash weaving or animation canceling, right? So nothing wrong with getting new gear out the gate. The problem is they nerf the old gear to oblivion and to sell the next chapter. Right. Yeah, give us ways to improve our DPS by 2 or 5%. Maybe nerf the old stuff by a little bit, but make it so it's still viable. Because like no matter what changes you make, there's always going to be a separation in desire and effort. Yeah, absolutely. If you want to keep the game healthy, you have to give people who play 80 hours a week something to do. But you also have to make the game fun for those who can only stop in for a few hours a week. If I can stop in for a few hours a week, do some questing, maybe hop into a dungeon with friends, I'll be happy, right? But not if every 3 months I have to change everything about any character I want to play. I think they don't put stuff like a tutorial arena in because anyone and everyone has Googled how to light attack weave and found hundreds of YouTube videos on it. But they haven't, Freddie. That's the problem. There are people, if you watch some of the newer streamers, people who haven't been around the game for years, they've never even heard of light attack weaving because there's nothing in the game that tells them. Not everybody watches YouTube videos or Twitch to learn to play a game. They play the game to learn the game. So if the game introduced light attack weaving and they didn't fully understand it from the arena, then they could go out and find YouTube videos to show it. But I would say a good chunk of the player base has no clue what light attack weaving is. And these conversations have proven it. Because I've had people come into stream and say, I don't have any clue what they're even talking about. Now, is that like 80% of the player base? Probably not. But 20 to 40% probably. Yes, anybody who has tried to get into a vet trial guild will eventually be told, hey, you need to be light attack weaving. But somebody who plays a few hours a week, who just wants to be able to go into an occasional dungeon but can't because their DPS is only, 25k, They don't know what light attack weaving is. Hey Karmar, the worst is changing what sets do after making unique builds for every character and after upgrading all that gear to legendary, of course. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And how many sets do we have in the game now? There is no way I'm going to remember what every set does. There are people who can. I cannot. But we have hundreds of different gear sets. And then they change them so frequently that I don't have a clue anymore. And this is, again, why I don't do build videos. I've been playing since Christmas, and these terms are all new to me. Dragon, I will help you with all of the terms. And I will show you how to light attack weave. Absolutely. Anytime you want. Hey, Ladybug. I learned about light attacks from guild members. They're a great source of help, too. Absolutely. And I encourage everybody to at least join a social guild, although I know that there are some people who do not want to take part in the guild experience. The problem is it's not the responsibility of YouTubers or streamers or even guildies to explain how to play the game. The game should explain how to play the game. If you need to see the average skill level go up, go to Stormhaven during gestures and watch Zone Chat complain about how hard the boar fight is. That's your average player. That is a very good point, Red. What is Blood Moon even going to do now? I don't know. You encounter those high numbers here on Twitch. Here on Twitch, you see maybe 40% people who do some weaving. Outside of Twitch, 90% of the people have less than 30k DPS. Really? I would not have anticipated it that high. I don't doubt it necessarily, but I think I've been part of the Twitch community too long. Even without light attack weaving, those people are still perfectly equipped to go into a normal trial and clear it. It's not difficult content. True, but are they equipped to go into a new DLC dungeon on Vet without light attack weaving? And could you have all 12 people go into a normal trial and clear it with almost no DPS? As someone who takes guildies, trade guild people into normal trials, it requires 3 or 4 people to be proficient because we have people come in as DPS doing less damage than the healers. For a while we held light attack clinics in my guilds. May need to bring that back. I think so. I think so, especially with all the hype around light attacks. I think you're going to find the people who don't know what it is. Normal trials, yes, it will not be pretty, and some of the bosses might take multiple pulls, but yes. I'm not kidding, I saw damage dealers do as low as 1.5k each. See, I don't think if you had 12 people doing 1.5k each, including healers and tanks, I don't think you could clear Rockgrove or Dreadsail Reef. Could you do it with 15k? Maybe. Probably. And in fact, a lot of the dungeons were created when that was good. When 15k was great. But the newer stuff, I don't know that that's the case. It's difficult to do less than 10k if you have decent gear. If you have your CP spent. If you come in with a level CP 160 in profit gear and green gear, it's easy to do less than 10k. And I see that all the time. You might actually see enraged mechanics on normal if they exist. I'm curious now, do they exist? Yeah, remember when 25k was the base for Vet Crag hard modes? Absolutely. Don't forget the level 4 training gear. I feel called out, Andrew. I remember when 9k was at least somehow decent. I had a guildie once. Now, granted, this was back when like 40k was probably about, you know, the standard. But I had somebody who was parsing on the precursor, and it was still taking him almost a minute to kill the precursor. They're out there. And I think it's because, in part, the game doesn't teach you how to play. It is expected. Even Gina during the stream was saying, well, maybe instead of a training arena, maybe we can just have Twitch streamers teach, have the ESO stream team teach it. But how many players never set foot on Twitch? I think that's an unfair burden. Granted, I will teach you as much as I know anytime about anything. I am absolutely fine with that. But you know the mini areas that Werewolf and Vamp Quest get. They should make mini tutorial zones that are repeatable, that teach you. I have one per lesson where you get to focus on one element to learn. Yeah, so my idea for the solo arena would have things like that and maybe achievements attached to it. So let's say you go into the arena, you learn a skill, there's a target dummy there that you can practice on by yourself, no witnesses, like at the guild hall. It's great that guilds, including mine, offer training dummies, but I have a lot of people say they don't use them because they don't want anybody to come watch them. So the solo arena would allow you to do that. And let's say you hit 80k on that dummy. It would give you an achievement that you could then share with a trial guild and say, hey, I got this achievement. And hopefully if they do it right, it would actually mean something. And so even console people could then prove their salt for a vet trial guild to be able to do things. Or maybe you get like a 90% hit rate on your light attacks when light attack weaving. And the game could tell that. That could be another achievement. And that's when they announce big giveaways. Usually the whole panel has 4K viewers of 20 million accounts, they say. Right. Not everybody uses Twitch. Absolutely. Very good point. So I have one where you learn light attacks, one for bash weave, one for freaking fishing even. I mean, every element of the help articles could become mini instances you could revisit. For sure. I will do a skill every 3 light attacks and only cast my dots once. Then it's not one long tutorial to cover way too much. Exactly. I think there should be set times or a set quest line that would take you through it. They could have come out with a new skill line instead of all this. The amount of changes they keep doing is baffling. Absolutely. And like I said, these combat changes so frequently, we've seen time and time again, they don't hurt the meta. The top tier 1%ers, often they use these changes to their advantage because, face it, a lot of them at least listen to the people who can see the numbers and like, oh, okay, this change means we can do this, this, and this, and we can squeak out an extra 2% DPS even though they've nerfed us. Like resto staff heavy attack builds, right? Something nobody else would... Putting daggers on a Magicka build, I wouldn't have thought of that, right? But there are people who do, and they let all the people who do the research and watch all the YouTube videos, and again, your casual player is not going to know any of that because they're not chasing down build videos or patch note videos on YouTube every time a change comes out. Who it hurts is the person who only plays a few hours a week and then has to re-farm gear every 3 months just so they could run their 1 or 2 trials a month. And that's my fear. In a game I played, you had to beat a boss fight in order to get qualified to do the top difficulty dungeons and raids. I like that too. But you're not wrong. A full team of people that have no idea what they're doing is going to have a hard time. But in my opinion, that's part of the effort thing. You want to do the content, put a little effort in. But a player or 2 or 3 can get into a group with people that have a vague idea of what they're doing and are gear gaming and get through just fine. Exactly. And that's why my trade guild runs a normal trial every week. It rotates. Tonight we're running Cloud Rest. And we have people who sign up every week who can do decent damage. They're not 1%ers, but they do well enough. And so then it doesn't matter who else signs up. We don't even care if you're below CP 160 anymore now that sticker book is a thing. So yeah, I agree. And so the content is still accessible to mid-tier or more casual players. You just can't do it all with nothing but casual players. Soon enough, we'll need to throw soul gems at bosses to get big boy DPS. Plus, with little tutorials, they can work on it and build them over time. Making new things in the game requires work, but doing it little by little could be more viable. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Then people could get hyped about which new mini tutorial was coming out. Absolutely. Absolutely. Don't want to be the ass in the room, but if someone only plays so casually, should changes be made for them that impacts the majority? Also a very good point and one that's been brought up. But I think that the game should be fun for everybody. Should everything in the game be accessible to more casual players? Probably not. Whether you're ready or not, like we said, we can get you through. And if you have any questions, just ask. It's a very casual group. But I think anybody who even plays 2 hours a week should be able to have fun. And if their entire experience is, oh, somebody in my guild said that this gear is crap now, I need to go farm new gear. Just to be able to run the... Okay, so let's say I've been playing for 5 years. Well, I started at launch, but I've been playing daily for 5 years. Let's say I got a full-time job on top of homeschooling my kid, etc., and now I can only really play on the weekends when I run dungeons with my friends. I know how to play the game, right? I know how to light attack weave, but I only have 2 to 3 hours a week to hang out with my friends on the weekends and get some stuff done. But with these big combat changes, now I'm having to spend part of that 2 to 3 hours farming gear. And my friends have to come help me farm the gear because I need the gear if we want to try out the new dungeons on Vet. You know what I mean? Should the whole game cater to someone who doesn't know how to light attack weave? Maybe not, but I think a tutorial section would cure a lot of that. So if they want to raise the floor, and then the patch after that, healers will need to knock out group members with a shield to heal people. But I do think the game should be fun. Now, can you do all the content if you've never had more than 2 or 3 hours a week to learn the game? No, you're probably just going to quest, right? But as a content or as a developer, I would think raising the floor would be easier than bringing down the ceiling. I think this is not the game for only 2 to 3 hours a week unless you focus on one area like dungeons or just main quests. Absolutely. I can see that too. Alright, let's get back to reading. The changes to Scorch and their morphs were done in attempts to try and help the class feel less intensely focused on buff management and allow for other actions in combat while still trying to retain their burst-oriented nature to a more balanced degree when comparing them to other burst skills and taking their total time before impact better into account. The original PTS iteration was ultimately too disruptive to those who are familiar with the class as it threw off the timing of the skill by a second, so we have brought it down back to the original duration while also keeping its overall timer divisible by 3 seconds to help ensure a rhythm that is felt with the class. By separating the damage, we can also better allow the skill to function as a burst skill or as a sustained DPS skill, where recasting it earlier will result in more total DPS, whereas waiting for the bigger explosion will result in those dopamine printing burst combos. Okay. And if you raise the floor and lower the ceiling, which is what it appears is happening, you effectively have changed nothing. How so? Hey, Gramps. So my understanding of their goal is to reduce the gap between the lowest and the highest so that it is easier to create content in that normal and vet range to accommodate most people. If you have some people who are only doing 8k DPS and some that are doing 140k DPS, it's going to be more difficult to create content that both the lower end find fun and the higher end find challenging than if you range from 30k to 80k. And I'm not saying they're going to bring it in that much, but I think that was the general idea. Because then you have normals that, are for like 30 to 40k people, and you have vets that are for like 60 to 70k people, and you have the vet hard mode, which would accommodate those who are 80k. I think that was the idea, although I'm exaggerating it. The complaint right now is that they have lowered the ceiling, but now they're also going to lower the health of the bosses, which changes nothing, effectively. Whereas the concern originally was the newer content, which was created with power creep in mind, that should probably be nerfed, but maybe not like the mage from Ethereal Archive. In my opinion, I don't really care what they do with the set meta changes or whatever. I just want new questy content and cosmetics. Why not just let unnerfed Oakensoul do that? Because it broke PvP, and I disagree with the way that they're changing it. I wish, because I liked Oakensoul. I think Oakensoul was good for players who had high lag, because then they didn't have to worry about weapon swapping, and then it doesn't actually weapon swap, so then they're hitting the wrong skill. It helped people who had the physical inability to do a lot of skills in a short amount of time. So you do like an Oakensoul heavy attack build, you're golden. It allowed people who prefer to do solo content to work with it, but it broke PvP. I wish that they would change something in Battle Spirit, or change Oakensoul so that it gives like Major Slayer, which doesn't help you in PvP. You know what I mean? I wish that that change had been different, because I do think Oakensoul achieved part of what they wanted to achieve. Who else is ready to do a high dopamine combo? Yeah. Dopamine printing burst combos. I 100% agree with you that if ZOS wants to increase the floors, ZOS should be responsible for teaching its player base how to play. A prologue quest could be implemented on those combat abilities. Yeah, like I said, a training arena of some sort. It could even be voluntary. So then if people complain, they can say, well, the content's there. You just have to take advantage of it. But maybe you don't have to use it. Or putting it as part of the Undaunted quest line or whatever. But allowing it to be accessible at all times, so you can go beat on a training dummy. And maybe it just spits out, instead of needing a combat metrics type add-on, it says, hey, you hit 40% of your light attacks this time. Congratulations. Hey, you beat it. You did 45% this time. Congratulations. And give us an achievement for certain benchmarks. Yeah, I agree. If you can disable it during Cyrodiil or nerf it during Cyrodiil, or like I said, change it to minor buffs but give us Major Slayer, so it doesn't work in PvP that way. But I think Oakensoul did solve. I know somebody who is running on an old computer and, you know, dealing with like 12 FPS. And we see that too when we have people from other countries, you know, play on NA, or their internet's bad, or they're dealing with hotspotting their phone in order to play, right? And Oakensoul helped a lot of that. Yeah, if ZOS can disable Gear Proc, surely they can disable Oakensoul. Major Slayer's Rojo's job, though. But for Oakensoul, typically you're not going to be using Oakensoul in a trial composite, because you're already getting a lot of that stuff anyway. Does it still work? Sure. Hey, Flames of Hannah. Hey, I've been lurking. Definitely agree with you on tutorials on dungeon and dungeon rolls, and let you know when you are getting better at light weaving. Yeah, and like somebody else said, they could start it with, okay, we're going to teach light attack weaving, and that's the only thing this arena is going to do. And they could introduce new tutorials later on. Like, oh, hey, we realize that most people don't understand how bashing works. You know, we're going to add a tutorial. They just need time to separate the gear mechanics between PvP and PvE so that changes they make for one have no effect on the other. And really, that's a huge thing it plagues a lot of games, right? I hear that games that keep PvP and PvE totally separate have better game health overall. I don't know if that's true. You guys know I'm pretty much an ESO purist, practically. You say that, but if the goal is to get people from the floor into hard content, they'll probably be abusing it. That could be. That could be. But I was also agreeing with you that the game was fine the way it was. Maybe nerf heavy and light attacks the way that they are nerfed now. I'm fine with that. I say that not having not played PTS yet since Monday. Nerf heavy and light attacks a little. Keep Oakensoul the way it is. Don't allow it in PvP. Fixed, right? Like, and those aren't major sweeping changes. It doesn't change how you play or what. It might change what gear you use, you know, with heavy and light attack changes, but for the most part, it's not going to change much. That's reasonable. Everyone loses, but the floor loses less. Exactly. And even some of the 1%, and Nephis has said this over and over, he's fine with light and heavy attack nerfs. Right now, there is no reason for people to be able to do 120 to 140k DPS. And if they go down to 110k DPS, it's still fine. Right? Shrinking the gap without ruining the game. And I think that's their goal, is to shrink the gap without ruining the game. We're just all in disagreement of how that is done. No, bringing down the ceiling does not help people at the floor. My understanding is it was to help developers create content that was for all levels. To be honest, doing 120 really makes it easier to take the lower end and new players into hard content. Granted, yeah, it becomes a free carry. Yep. Oh yeah, the high DPS has always been fantastic and fun, right? And makes it easier to carry people. The higher your DPS, the more you can carry. For sure. Although I've seen some new players carried into harder content like 2 weeks into the game, and then they quit because they are completely overwhelmed by it. And they're not really having fun because they're not actually doing anything. Alright, dual wield. Flurry fixed an issue where this ability and its morphs were being treated as damage over time in some cases. Warfare cutting defense fixed an issue where the damage from this node was not proccing enchantments or poisons as advertised. And now we're into item sets, or companions, item sets. Oakensoul. This item set now also grants you Minor Slayer, Minor Aegis, and Empower. And this is where things really get wonky. We've been keeping a close eye on Oakensoul's heated debates through the PTS cycle, where the nerfs were noted as justified in PvP environments, but ultimately hit the set a bit too harsh and a bit too hard in some PvE scenarios. We opted to avoid enabling too much damage on the set by adding the major versions of Slayer and Aegis. Okay. As these buffs are meant to be sourced from trial sets and to encourage coordinated groups behavior for groups. Okay, so that addresses the concern that you guys had. Instead, we went with the much more readily available minor versions to help out players who may not have access to Trials gear or just have other sets they'd rather run. In addition, we wanted to add the new Empower buff, which is by design now focused on helping accessibility, just like this ring is. So it was a stars aligning moment that we think will drastically help the set claw back some of its power without showing up on veteran players' bars as frequently as we saw. I don't know how true that is without trying it out. Because if they buffed the resto staff heavy attack, and now Empower does 80% extra damage to heavy attacks. I mean, let's face it, the 1% is always going to go for whatever does the most damage. Regardless of how fun it is, or difficult it is, or whatever, they're going to go for the big deeps. And if that means standing there and doing nothing but heavy attack, that's what they'll do. So I'm curious how this is going to play out. Overall, I agree with the sentiment. I agree with the goal here. I agree with the goal here with Oakensoul. I just don't know how much they thought this through. Okay. And I think that's about the gist of it. Am I missing anything else? That's it.